He didn't raise his voice that day. He didn't have to. Every word my father spoke landed the way a blade does when it knows exactly where to cut. He looked straight ahead, not at me, and told a room full of officers that I was a waste of a uniform. He said it calmly, like it was a fact, not an opinion. I'd heard versions of that sentence my whole life, in smaller and quieter rooms, at dinner tables, in the silence after his pride for someone else. It never stopped hurting, but I learned to swallow it, like metal tasting of rust. That day, though, sitting there while he destroyed what was left of my name, I realized something had changed. It wasn't the humiliation, it wasn't even the betrayal. It was the sudden, sharp understanding that my silence had been feeding his certainty. So I stopped being silent. He didn't know it yet, but the next words out of my mouth would undo everything he thought he knew about me, and about himself. The courtroom in Norfolk felt colder than metal, the kind of cold that made sound travel slower, heavier. Every breath echoed off the steel walls, steady, rhythmic, almost like a countdown. 3 rows of uniforms, 12 still faces, 1 gavel waiting to fall. I sat upright, palms flat against the table, the insignia on my sleeve catching the white glare above. The man called to testify stepped forward, my father. The same man who used to say that silence was discipline, that victory was the only proof of worth. He carried himself like a relic from another war. Spine rigid, boots polished, voice measured and proud. When he spoke, it wasn't anger that filled the room, it was certainty. Captain Anderson lacks grit. He declared, "She hides behind screens, behind data, behind rules. That isn't soldiering, that's paperwork in uniform." The air thinned, pens stopped moving. I watched a faint tremor run through the light on the floor, the same light cutting between us like a border I could never cross. Lieutenant Harper Lewis leaned closer, whispering something I barely heard. I shook my head. Let him finish. My father didn't look at me when he continued. His tone was clinical, almost proud of its cruelty. My daughter turned away from real service. The Anderson name was built on courage, not caution. Each word struck with surgical precision. Each one recorded, permanent. When Admiral Vance asked if I had a response, I rose, my voice calm, stripped of everything but intent. "I won't defend myself, sir." The room froze. "I'll correct the record." And as the heavy door closed behind me, the sound of metal on metal marked the start of something neither of us could take back. The house I grew up in sat on the slope of Blue Ridge, Georgia, where the flag never came down and the smell of whiskey lingered longer than prayer. Every dinner followed the same ritual. My father poured his drink, my mother set the plates, and silence did the rest. It was a house that believed in victories, not voices. For years, I thought that silence was pride. Later, I understood it was surrender. Ethan, my older brother, was the family's living proof of honor. A Marine, broad-shouldered and easy with confidence. The kind of man my father's generation understood without needing words. I, on the other hand, was the daughter who thought too much, talked too long, and asked why when I was supposed to nod. The night Ethan got his promotion, the house glowed with noise and bourbon. My father raised his glass, his face flushed with pride. "To my son, a real warrior carrying the Anderson blood with honor." Applause, laughter, the clinking of crystal. When the cheers faded, I tried to share my own small victory. I said quietly that I'd been reassigned to Air Force intelligence. They told me it was an honor. He turned to me, smirked, and said what the room was already thinking, that medals come easier now for people who don't get their boots dirty. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, just careless. It was the kind that told me exactly where I stood. My mother reached out, her hand shaking as she set down the carving knife. "He doesn't mean it," she murmured. But the way he looked at me said otherwise. Pride in his eyes for Ethan, pity for me. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I opened his study to borrow a pen. The air smelled like old cigars and paper. In the drawer, under a pile of service commendations, I found an envelope, yellowed, dusted, my own handwriting on the front. Postmarked 2008. My first letter home after enlistment. The seal was still intact. I held it for a long time, fingers trembling over the crease. He'd never opened it, never needed to. He already had his verdict on who I was. That discovery was small, quiet, and devastating. It was the first time I understood that my father's silence wasn't absence. It was choice. And that choice would one day be the reason he'd have to listen to me, whether he wanted to or not. 3 years earlier, the world was dust and static. Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, a place that smelled like heat and metal. I was leading a small tactical analysis team under Operation Silver Veil, a classified mission to recover data from abandoned biochemical storage sites after withdrawal. We worked in a windowless bunker, half of it underground, with no flags on our sleeves, no names, no identities, just a series of codes and a silent understanding that if something went wrong, we didn't exist. The night it happened, the server began humming louder than usual, pulling data faster than the system could handle. Then, a flash. The alarm howled. The ground split with the sound of shattering steel. I remember the heat before the pain, the taste of blood, the weight of another body as I dragged them through the smoke. Something sharp tore across my right side. Fire shot through my ribs. The hallway was filled with screams and dust, then nothing but the ringing in my ears. When I woke, everything was white. The field medic looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. His voice cracked when he said it. "Captain, you're officially dead. The system wiped you from the database to contain the breach." I pushed myself up, vision swimming. "Who authorized that?" He hesitated, eyes flicking to the clipboard. "The Pentagon. Clearance signed through Colonel D. Anderson's office." My breath caught. In one heartbeat, the world that had shaped me came undone. The man who once taught me that honor was a scar you could wear proudly had erased me from existence. When I returned stateside, they treated me like a ghost pretending to be alive. They said I'd fabricated the mission to cover up a data failure, Operation Silver Veil. They called it fiction. The mission that never existed. There were no reports, no witnesses, no record, just the burn of a healed wound, a small X carved beneath my ribs, and the kind of silence that eats through steel. In the months that followed, I found fragments, encrypted messages, missing transmissions, names that didn't appear on any roster. Silver Veil hadn't failed. It had been buried to protect someone far higher than me. And the one man who could have stopped it, Admiral Vance, was forced to stay quiet under orders from those who signed the burial. That was the night I stopped believing that truth could protect anyone. From then on, I learned to protect it myself, quietly, ruthlessly, and with patience, the kind my father would never see coming. The prep room was gray and bare, colder than the courtroom itself. 2 cups of coffee sat untouched on the table, steam long gone. Harper paced the narrow space, his shoes clicking against the tile, voice tight with worry. "Ma'am, if we plead miscommunication and show remorse, the tribunal might reduce the penalty. You'll keep your pension. You can rebuild." I looked up from the file in front of me, my tone even. "We're not defending the charge, Lieutenant. We're nullifying it." He stopped moving. The silence stretched. My hand slid another file across the table. The paper rolled, its corners yellowed, stamped in fading red, Protocol Theta 7. He stared like he was looking at something forbidden. "No, that protocol's dead. Declassified before I even joined the Corps. Invoking it's suicide. Then it's the right grave to dig." His throat tightened. "The tribunal will call it manipulation of classified material. Admiral Vance might even—" "Vance signed it. He's the only one with clearance to remember it exists." Harper froze. For a moment, he just watched me, the realization setting in that I wasn't walking into this hearing to beg. I was walking in to dismantle it. He flipped through the file, fingers shaking, and stopped on the last page. Admiral Vance's digital signature flickered above a line that read, "Operative Silver Veil. Presumed KIA. Status, deceased." His voice cracked. You're listed as dead. Ma'am? On paper. You don't exist. I closed the folder carefully. Then it's time they met the ghost they buried. When I stood, the chair scraped back like the start of a countdown. My boots struck the hallway metal, each step echoing as the courtroom doors opened. Light flooded the space ahead. Blinding, sterile, final. The chamber was sealed. No cameras, no whispers from the press. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of metal polish. My father sat behind me, eyes fixed on Admiral Vance. Never on me. As the room settled, an old image returned. A tent in Afghanistan, the sand blowing through the seams. I'd written to him that night, ink shaking across the page. Dad, I've seen men die for data. It's not glory, but it saves lives. Years later, that letter came back unopened. My mother had found it in his drawer. He said it didn't sound like you. She whispered. Said real soldiers don't write like that. Now, hearing him testify again, the echo cut deeper. My daughter never understood what it meant to stand on the field. She hides behind code names and excuses. Harper straightened. Sir, permission to request clarification on classification code Theta 7 invoked by my client. Vance's eyes sharpened. Theta 7? You know the consequences of invoking that? Yes, sir. But my client claims direct authorization. The air went still. Every officer in the room turned toward me. I stood, calm, unflinching. I invoke continuity of command, Protocol Theta 7, under authority granted to Operative Silver Veil. A murmur rippled across the table. A general rose. That operation doesn't exist. It was erased. So was I. Vance's gavel hit once. Thunder inside metal walls. Seal the chamber. Everyone else, out. As the door shut, Harper's expression shifted from fear to understanding. This wasn't a trial. It was cleanup. One final attempt to erase a living secret. My father finally looked at me. I met his gaze. You erased me once, Dad. Let's see if you can do it again. Vance stood, silver insignia catching the light. Captain Anderson, show me your authorization. I unbuttoned my collar, drawing a slow breath. The silence was thick enough to taste, the kind that comes before a truth too heavy to stay buried. Only 7 of us remained in the sealed room. The lock clicked, cutting us off from the world outside. No press, no spectators, just the truth and those bound to guard it. The overhead lights threw a harsh white glare, stretching my shadow until it met my father's across the tiled floor. Admiral Vance leaned forward, voice precise and heavy. Captain Anderson, you're aware that false invocation of Theta 7 can lead to immediate discharge and imprisonment? I met his eyes. I am, sir. But Theta 7 isn't false. You signed it, March 3rd, 2020, Operation Silver Veil. A pen rolled from someone's hand and clattered to the floor. Vance's stare didn't waver. You know the clearance level that requires? Omega, I said. And my designation was Spectre. The room went silent. The word froze the air. Only the highest circles ever heard it spoken. Soldiers erased from existence so their missions could live. You're saying you were Spectre? No, sir. I'm saying you buried me alive for national security. Harper's throat tightened. My father shot up, face red. Enough of this fantasy. My daughter has lost her mind. Vance lifted a hand. Sit down, Colonel. You're here as a witness, not a prosecutor. I won't sit while my family's name is dragged. Vance's gavel cracked the air. This chamber is sealed. If your name's in it, it's already dragged. Silence fractured like glass. I opened the folder, the same one he'd once signed without a second thought. 2 signatures stared back at him, Vance's above, his beneath. You signed it, I said evenly. You authorized the purge. You deleted me. His mouth moved without sound. I thought it was routine clearance. You didn't read it, like my letter. The color drained from his face. He sank into the chair as Vance scanned the document. My God! Silver Veil wasn't terminated. It was buried. Captain Anderson was the only survivor. Brigadier Hall stiffened. That's classified to Omega level, sir. So is this hearing, Vance replied coldly. When the Admiral matched Hall's signature to a corruption file, the man's facade cracked. You can't prove… Vance slammed the file on the table. We just did. The security cameras went dark. Only one cone of light remained. Mine. Vance's voice softened. Captain Anderson, show me your authorization. I rose slowly, fingers brushing the top button of my collar. The moment was heavier than judgment. It felt like resurrection. The room held its breath as I unfastened my collar. The fabric parted, and pale light fell across the scar etched beneath my ribs. A deep, clean X carved into skin and memory. Vance exhaled, voice barely a whisper. The nightshade mark. Dear God, your specter. Harper stood frozen. My father staggered back, eyes wide. That mark, it can't be the mark you signed to authorize, I said. Vance's jaw clenched. He'd approved the Spectre initiative years ago. Soldiers stripped of identity, living ghosts. Seeing me now was his reckoning. He rose abruptly, voice echoing. Colonel Anderson, you called your daughter a useless soldier. She's one of only 2 operatives alive from Silver Vale, the mission that prevented a sarin strike on 4 nations. My father collapsed into his chair, whispering, I didn't know. You never wanted to. Vance straightened. Captain Anderson, you carried a mission this court had no right to bury. Your record and rank are reinstated, effective immediately. Harper saluted. I nodded, asking softly, permission to address the witness. Sir, granted. I turned toward my father. You told me real soldiers bleed where people can see. I did. You just weren't looking. He didn't respond. The light exposed every crack in his face. His uniform hung loose, as if even it had stopped believing in him. Vance's final words closed the hearing. All charges dismissed with prejudice. This tribunal is sealed permanently. We exchanged a silent salute. As I walked away, the scrape of my father's chair echoed behind me, slow, uneven, like the sound of a monument breaking apart. The room held its breath. Admiral Vance's voice broke the stillness. Major Mila Anderson, that's your rightful title. The tribunal recognizes your service under Operation Silver Veil. The gavel hit once, the sound cracking like the last gunfire of a decade-long war. I stood tall, light catching the faint scar beneath my collar, the mark that outlived every denial. Behind me, my father sat frozen. You were dead, he murmured. Only to you, sir. His fists trembled. I signed to protect national security. No, you signed to protect your image. The words struck harder than any blow. His shoulders sagged. The starched uniform suddenly too big for him. Vance stepped closer. Voice grave. Colonel Anderson, you spent your life chasing glory in the open. Your daughter fought hers in silence, and she won. Harper's voice cracked. She saved over 300 lives. Sir, my father's head bowed, a tear cutting through the shine of his metal. I taught her to fight, he whispered. You taught me to hide pain, I said. I just learned where to aim it. The final gavel fell. He turned away, his footsteps echoing like a monument collapsing. I stood alone, the victory heavy as loss. He built his life on medals, and I ended it with truth. 6 months later, Langley looked softer under the morning light. My office faced a stretch of pine trees that swayed like they remembered silence better than people did. Sunlight spilled across the desk, brushing over files stamped classified and the nameplate that still felt new. Major Mila Anderson, Intelligence Liaison, Air Operations Division. The door opened quietly. Harper stepped in, uniform crisp, a new bar on his shoulder. He set an envelope on the desk. Came through civilian mail. It's from him. The return address stopped me for half a breath. Colonel Daniel Anderson. I didn't touch it. You're not even curious? He asked. I was. I said. 10 years ago. He hesitated, then nodded and left. The door clicked shut. The room returned to its rhythm, the hum of the air vent, the soft rustle of leaves outside. I turned to my laptop. One new email blinked from a familiar address. Subject: Mila. I was wrong about everything. I wish I could undo it. I read the first line and stopped. My hand moved to the archive button. One quiet click. The message vanished. There was no anger, no relief, only stillness. Forgiveness isn't reunion, I thought. It's the end of repetition. The phone rang. A request for oversight on a humanitarian mission in Ukraine. I said yes. Work saves more than silence ever could. As the sun shifted west, a thin beam caught the edge of my scar, turning it silver. It no longer hurt. It just reminded me that I'd survived. A year later, I found myself back in Blue Ridge, Georgia. The Veterans Hall smelled of pine polish and history, the kind that clung to the walls like a memory you couldn't quite shake. My father's photograph hung among the Veterans of Honor, black and white, framed in quiet dignity. I stepped onto the small stage, facing a room of young recruits, all restless and eager. Near the front, a blonde woman raised her hand. "Ma'am, how did you recover from being called useless by your own father?" I smiled softly, the morning light glinting in her eyes. By proving him wrong without needing him to see it. The room went still. My gaze lifted to my father's picture on the wall. His expression, once hard as stone, seemed gentler now. He measured worth in medals. I said, "I learned to count in lives saved." The crowd stood, applauding. I nodded once and stepped outside. Mist rolled through the Georgia hills, the wind whispering through the pines. The same sound that once haunted the courtroom, now strangely peaceful. I touched the scar beneath my uniform, the skin smooth and healed. Some wounds fade, but the lesson stays. A transport plane crossed overhead, sunlight catching its wings in a flash of silver. I watched it disappear into the clouds and smiled, not in victory, but in peace. This time, the legacy didn't need medals, it only needed truth.